Hello, fanatics. Hello. As you may or may not know, I took some time off YouTube and so much has gone on. But I'm going to do a whip and chat, so don't worry, I'll catch you up on that. But I've been diamond painting recently and I'm back into it now. And I've been listening to my true crime, and I thought, you know what? I haven't done a true crime, I don't know, in forever. Personally, I love true crime. It's no secret. And I like listening to it while diamond painting or watching documentaries and things like that. So I've got back into it, and I'm going to do my best to try and keep up with this, because it's something that I can focus on, share with you guys on cases that I come across or look into. And I'm going to release them on Sunday evenings. That way I get to research them and dive into them and give them time and attention. But today, just a spoiler alert, we're back in it's the 31st of March in 1922 that this case happens. So it's the 1920s. We don't have DNA, we don't have any of that stuff at our disposal that we do today. So I'm guessing that's one of the reasons why it's remained unsolved to this day. But there's a lot of iffy situations that should have really been looked into that wasn't. By the family, I mean. So this case, it remains unsolved even today. Definitely today, because it no longer exists. They knocked it down. So it is considered one of the most gruesome and puzzling unsolved crimes in German history. So we're going all the way to Germany. Now, for those of you who know me and know that I do these cases, I struggle sometimes with surnames or simple things such as Maryland in America. You know, it's Maryland, so to say it as Maryland is a lot for me. So I'm going to go with first names. Now, just to give you a bit of background into this case. So it's known as the Hinterkaifeck murders. Now it's German, so Hinter in Germany means behind. Kaifeck is a small nearby hamlet. So it's located behind. Yes, you see where I'm going. So more precisely, it's about 1 mile north of it and is bordered by dense woods. So imagine the scene. Okay, I'm going to put Hinterkaifeck up on the screen as it was at the time. As I say, no longer exists. But let's dive in. Okay, let's just dive in. So at Hinterkaifeck, okay, so it's a farm essentially, and we have Andreas Gruber. He is 63. His wife Cecilia is 72. Their daughter Victoria is 35, and Victoria has 2 children. Cecilia, yes, named after her mum, I'm guessing. So I will say, mum or little Cecilia, because it jumps obviously. Little Cecilia is 7 years old, and Joseph is 2. Now, there's also a maid. They hire a maid, a live-in maid, and at this time when this occurs, her name is Maria and she is 44, okay? But let's just go back to the beginning, because there were some strange occurrences happening in and around Hinterkaifeck just before this case happens. Okay, so 6 months prior to this happening, they have a different maid, and at the time she quit, and it's the reason it's believed that she up and left, quit her job, is she had heard strange noises in the attic, and she believed that the house was haunted. So she was like, no thank you, I want no part of a haunted house, I'm going home. Now, again, around the same time, okay, Andreas, the dad, he found a strange newspaper from Munich on the property in March 1922, so shortly before this case happened. So the maid's left because she's hearing noises in the attic. Then there's this strange newspaper that appears at the house. Now, he doesn't remember buying it, and he thought, well, the postman must have just dropped it off at the wrong address, right? So he asked around, but no one in the vicinity subscribed to that newspaper, because Munich, again, is a distance away. So this strange newspaper has appeared and no one has a reason for it. Now, just before, Andreas told the neighbours that he had discovered tracks in the fresh snow that led from the forest, which is on the outskirts of their property, leading up to a door with a broken lock. And inside this door was the farm, their machine room. I can't imagine what machinery's in there, but, you know, milking cows and whatnot, I have no idea. But you have someone possibly living in the attic that no one's checking out. You have a strange Munich newspaper appearing out of nowhere that doesn't relate to anyone in the vicinity. And there's fresh tracks in the snow that leads to the machine room on the farm. Now, that same night, the family heard footsteps coming from the attic. But Andreas found no one when he searched the building. Now, it says he searched the building. Did he go in the attic itself? Remains unknown. So he told several people about all of this goings on within his own home, right? So he's talking to people about all of this, but he refused offers of help, and they didn't report it to the police either. So we're like, all right then. Now, according to a school friend of 7-year-old Cecilia, the young girl reported that her mum, Victoria, had fled the farm the night before this case happens, after a violent quarrel, and only hours later had been found in the forest. Now, let's go to March 31st. Okay. It's a Friday afternoon in 1922, and the new maid, Maria, arrived at the farm. Maria's sister had escorted her there and left the farm after a short stay. So she made sure she was happy and made sure that she wanted to stay, and had a quick cup of tea, I dare say, and then on her way she went. Right, you're happy, I'm happy, great, all good. The sister was probably the last person to see everyone alive. Maria had only worked for 1 day. Brand new, dropped her off, and it appears that in the late evening, Victoria and her 7-year-old daughter Cecilia and her parents, Andreas and Mum Cecilia, were lured to the family barn through the stable, where they were murdered one at a time. The perpetrator or perpetrators used a mattock belonging to the family and blows to the head. Oh, that's so sad. Blows to the head. They then moved into the living quarters. They went back into the house where, with the same weapon, they found Joseph sleeping in his bassinet and Maria in her bedroom. My gosh. I mean, it takes a special someone to wipe out a family. You had Joseph, who was in his 60s, Cecilia in her 70s, Victoria in her 30s. But Joseph was just 2 years old, and Maria was 44. 4 days passed between the murders and the discovery of the bodies. On April 1st, coffee sellers Hans and Edward arrived in Hinterkaifeck to take an order. No one responded to knocks on the door or the window, so they walked around the yard, but they didn't find anyone. They noticed that the gate to the machine house was open, but they thought, not going to go in there, we're going to go. And they left. Little Cecilia was absent from school without an excuse for the next few days, and the family failed to show up for church. Local mechanic Albert, he went to Hinterkaifeck on the 4th of April to repair an engine. He stated that he hadn't seen any of the family and heard nothing but the sounds of the farm animals and the dog inside the barn. After waiting for about an hour, he decided to just start his repair, just to get to work, which he completed in roughly 4.5 hours. So again, he's there working on his repair, not seeing anyone. I mean, this is quite a lot of people, isn't it? He's not seen the maid, he's not seen the mum, the dad, or Victoria, or he's not seen anyone in 4.5 hours. But, at around 3:30 p.m, Lorenz, he sent his son Johann, who is 16, and his stepson Joseph, who is 9, to Hinterkaifeck to see whether they could make contact with the family, because they literally disappeared. Like, no one's seen them, no one's heard from them. So he sent his 16-year-old and 9-year-old to go to check on them, basically. When they reported that they hadn't seen anyone, Lorenz headed to the farm that same day with Michael and Jacob. Upon entering the barn, he walked into the barn and he found the bodies of Andreas, his wife Cecilia, his daughter Victoria, and little Cecilia. Shortly afterwards, they found Maria, the maid, and the youngest member of the family, little Joseph, murdered inside the home. So tragic. So tragic. I can't imagine walking in on that. Inspector George and his department investigated the case. Initial investigations were hampered by contamination of the crime scene by onlookers, because everyone in the area had now heard about this and they all wanted to go see. So the crime scene was trampled on. Also, onlookers, I don't quite know who these people were, but they decided to move the bodies and all the items around, and even cooked and ate meals in the kitchen. Like, seriously? You're in someone else's house for a start, you know. The day after the discovery of the bodies, the court doctor, Johann Baptist, performed autopsies in the barn. Again, 1922. Like, wouldn't happen these days. They would, you know, take photos and document evidence, and take them to a sanitised area. But, you know, but he did it in the barn, and it was established that a mattock was most likely the murder weapon. Although the weapon itself was not found at the scene, but it wouldn't have been, would it? Because some people moved things. So, you know. Now this is really sad, and just a heads up, but little Cecilia, evidence was present that she was alive for several hours after the attack. She had torn her hair out while laying in straw. Like, oh my gosh. The skulls of the victims were removed and sent to Munich for further examination. Now, I just want to go back because obviously we're in 1922 and I didn't know what a mattock was. But what it is, I'll put a picture on screen, but it's like a pickaxe essentially, but one part is an axe and the other part is used for something else. I think woodwork or something. Yeah, I'll put a picture up. So, what was the motive? They first suspected the motive to be robbery. The police interrogated travelling craftsmen, vagrants and several inhabitants from the surrounding villages, but they abandoned this theory when a large amount of money was found inside the house. It was clear that the perpetrator, or plural, had remained at the farm for several days. They fed the cattle and consumed the entire supply of bread from the kitchen and had recently cut meat from the pantry. I know. With no clear motive to be gleaned from the crime scene, the police began to formulate a list of suspects. But despite repeated arrests, no murderer has ever been found, and the files were closed in 1955. The last interrogations took place in 1986 before Detective Chief Superintendent Conrad retired. Now, if the files were closed in 1955, but Conrad was still looking into it in 1986. Inconsistent much. In the inspection record of the court commission, it was noted that the victims were probably drawn to the barn by restlessness in the stable, resulting in noises from the animals. May not be completely plausible, as investigators discovered that noise from the barn could not be heard from the house. So whatever lured them there, it was not restless animals. They were literally lured there. They might have seen someone and thought, that's the person whose newspaper it is, and let's go ask, or something, I don't know. On the night after the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, Michael, now he was the one that I think found the bodies, before, but 3 days before they were found, Michael happened to pass by Hinterkaifeck, and he observed that the oven had been heated by someone. That person had approached him with a lantern, and it was bright, so he's kind of squinting, like looking at him. That person had approached him, kind of blinding him, whereupon he hastily continued on his way. Michael also noticed that the smoke from the fireplace had a revolting smell. This incident was not followed up, and no investigation was conducted to determine what had been burned that night in the oven. You can leave that to your imagination, I guess. On April the 1st at 3 a.m, the farmer and butcher Simon was on his way home when he saw two mysterious figures at the edge of the forest. When the strangers saw him, they turned around so that their faces could not be seen. Later, when he heard about the murders in Hinterkaifeck, he thought it was possible that strangers might be involved. You think? In the middle of May 1927, so this is 5 years on? 23, 24, 25, 26, yeah. 5 years later, a stranger was said to have stopped a resident at midnight, asking him questions about the murder before shouting that he was the murderer, and then began running into the woods. This stranger has never been identified. So let's talk about suspects, because it's still unsolved. They must have had suspects along the way. So Carl Gabriel, he was the husband of Victoria. He had reportedly been killed in December 1914 during the First World War by a shell attack in France, but his body had never been recovered. After the murders, people began to speculate about whether he had in fact died in the war. Victoria had conceived and given birth to her son Joseph in her husband's absence. The boy, now here we go, it's going to get seedy now, but Joseph, the little boy who was 2 at the time, she had given birth to her son, but there was no husband. Okay, so if he had died in 1914 as believed, this is now, that boy would have been born in 1920. So was she seeing someone else? Who knows? But it's rumoured, not necessarily truth, but it was rumoured that he was the product of an incestuous relationship between Victoria and Andreas, the dad, which was documented in court and known in the village. Now, he was found to be assaulting his daughter, and the town society around them convicted them both of incest, which I don't know if Victoria was a willing participant in that, or because it kind of suggests that it is, but I find that hard to believe. I would rather think that Andreas, if it happened, kind of, you know where I'm going. I don't think she would have happily have gone along with that. After the end of the Second World War, war captives were released prematurely from Soviet captivity, claimed that they had been sent home by a German-speaking Soviet officer who claimed to be the Hinterkaifeck murderer. However, some of the men later revised their statements, which diminished their credibility. Some theorised that the solvent officer in question might well have been Carl Gabriel, because those who claimed to have seen Carl after his reported death testified that he had wanted to go to Russia. So it turns out he might not have perished in 1914. So that's very interesting. On a side note, I wonder how easily it would have been for the police officers to find out if there was any truth to that in 1922. I guess all they would have to do is call up the barracks and say, was Carl Gabriel, this kind of, what was he, some kind of officer? Like, I thought he died. I don't know. I don't know how easily that would have been determined. Lorenz. Now, he is also linked. Shortly after the death of his first wife in 1918, Lorenz was believed to have had a relationship with Victoria, and he is the father of Joseph. Now, Lorenz came under suspicion by locals. Again, the locals are doing all the work here. Not sure what the police are doing, but he became suspicious by locals early in the investigation because of his several suspicious actions. Immediately after the discovery of the bodies, I think he was the one that sent his son, the 16-year-old and the 9-year-old. I think he was the one that sent them there. Then they came back and said, no, we can't find them. Then he went and found the bodies. That is a bit suspicious when you look at it that way. Okay, so he became suspicious by the locals because of his actions immediately after the discovery of the bodies. When Lorenz and his friends arrived to investigate, they had to break a gate to enter the barn because all the doors were locked. However, immediately after finding the 4 bodies in the barn, he apparently unlocked the front door with a key and suspiciously entered the house alone. The key to the house had gone missing several days before the murders, although it is possible that Lorenz, as a neighbour or potentially seeing Victoria, might have been given a key. When asked by his companions why had he gone into the house alone, it was unclear whether the murderer might still be in there. Lorenz allegedly stated that he went in to look for his son Joseph. I'm guessing the 2-year-old, not the 9-year-old, because again they have the same name, like Cecilia. And it's known that Lorenz had disturbed the bodies at the scene, therefore compromising the investigation, which, if he is guilty, I don't know, because if I walked into a crime scene, the last thing I would be doing is moving the bodies. But if you are guilty, then you're now contaminating evidence, and then you can say, well, of course my DNA is there because I moved them. You know what I mean? This is so... it's a lot, isn't it? For many years after, local suspicion remained on Lorenz because of his strange comments. Again, comments, which were seen as indicating knowledge of details that only the killer would know. According to information in the files for the case, local teacher Hans, another repeating name, local teacher Hans discovered Lorenz visiting the remains of the demolished Hinterkaifeck in 1925. Now, I haven't got that far yet, but it has been demolished. I will get into that later. But upon being asked why he was there, Lorenz stated that the perpetrator's attempt to bury the family's remains in the barn had been hindered by frozen ground. Because remember, there was fresh snow on the ground, from what I said earlier. This was seen as evidence that Lorenz had intimate knowledge of the conditions of the ground at the time of the murders. Although, being a neighbour and familiar with the local land, he may have just made an educated guess. Another speculation that Lorenz murdered the family after Victoria demanded financial support for little Joseph, the 2-year-old, before his death in 1941. Lorenz conducted and won several civil claims for slander against persons who described him as the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. Now, if you were guilty, would you pursue a case? Well, you see, again, looking at true crime and people who inject themselves into a case, they kind of want knowledge, don't they? They're kind of like, are you close to finding out it was me yet, or are you way off still? But would you go and set off civil claims if you were guilty? Because that would draw attention. I don't know. I'll leave that for you to decide. Okay. Adolf Gump was listed as a suspect as early as the 9th of April due to his connection. I can't pronounce this. Let's see what this is. Highlands Free Corps. It was a voluntary paramilitary organisation that in the early years in Germany fought against communist and Polish insurgents. So that's what he was a part of. So because of that link, he was kind of like, Gump was said to have participated in the murder of 9 farmers in another place, a separate case to this one. But 9 farmers were found murdered, and he was kind of linked to that, said that he participated in that. So would it be a stretch to believe that he was involved in this one as well? But, you know, during his fight against the 1921 Polish uprising in the region, he had a warrant out for his arrest issued by a district court. In 1951, prosecutor Andreas, again, why so many replica names? But this was a prosecutor, Andreas, not the dad, investigated brothers Adolf and Anton Gump about the murders at Hinterkaifeck. Their sister, I can't pronounce that, but their sister claimed on her deathbed that Adolf and Anton had committed the murders. As a result, Anton Gump was remanded to police custody, but Adolf had already died in 1944. After a short time, however, Anton was dismissed again, and in 1954 the case against him was finally discontinued because he could not be proven to have participated in that crime. Now, we have Carl S. and Andreas S. Two separate people from the two that we've already talked about. In 1971, a woman named Therese wrote a letter citing an event in her youth. At the age of 12, she witnessed her mother receiving a visit from the mother of the brothers Carl and Andreas S. The woman claimed that her sons from Sattleberg were the two murderers of Hinterkaifeck. The mother said Andreas S. regretted that he lost his penknife in the course of the conversation. In fact, when the farm was demolished in 1923, you see, I find that very odd. You've demolished the building, and I understand why. It was a tragic scene, and they did it for reasons. But a year, when you can still go back and get evidence and document things. But when this farm was demolished in 1923, a pocket knife was found that could not be clearly assigned to anyone. However, the knife could have easily have belonged to one of the murder victims. This track was followed without result, and the sister of these two brothers, the former maid at Hinterkaifeck, was certain she had already seen the penknife in the yard during her service. But her brother said, I missed that knife. Peter Weber was named as a suspect by another Joseph Betts. The two worked together in the winter of 1919 to 1920 as labourers, and they shared a room. Now, according to Betts, Peter spoke of a remote farm, Hinterkaifeck. Peter knew that only one old couple lived there with their daughter and two children. It was likely he knew about the relationship, I'm going to use brackets on that, air quotes, about the relationship between Daddy Andreas and daughter Victoria. Betts testified in a hearing that Peter suggested killing the old man to get the family's money. When Betts did not respond to the offer, Weber stopped talking about it. Okay, so the former maid. Do you remember the former maid who left because she thought the house was haunted? She worked there from November 1920 to about September 1921. she suspected the two brothers, Anton and this is another Anton and Carl Bickler, I'm going to say, I'm not saying that right, I'm sure, had helped with the potato harvest at Hinterkaifeck, and therefore they knew the premises. Now, the maid said to the brothers that they talked to her often about the Gruber family, all of them. Anton reportedly suggested that the family ought to be dead. The maid also emphasised in her interrogation that the farm dog, who barked at everyone, never barked at Anton. In addition, she reported speaking with a stranger through her window at night. The maid believed it was Carl Bickler, the brother of Anton. She thought that Anton and Carl could have committed the murder together with a George, who had worked and knew of the family fortune. Supposedly, George had broken into the home in November 1920 and stolen a number of items, although he denied it. He did state that he had carved the handle of the murder weapon when he was working at Hinterkaifeck, and he knew that the tool would have been kept in the barn. My gosh. Okay, the Tyler brothers, definitely not saying that right, but the Tyler brothers were also suspected, according to a statement by this former maid, the one that left because of the house being haunted. The brothers had already committed several minor burglaries in the area before the crime. The maid said that Joseph Tyler stood at her window at night. She spoke to a lot of people at this window at night, didn't she? She spoke to Joseph at her window at night and asked her questions about the family, but she did not answer. In conversation, Joseph Tyler claimed to know which family member was sleeping in which room and stated that they had a lot of money. During their conversation, the maid noted that there was another person nearby. According to her statement, Joseph and the stranger looked at the machine house and turned their eyes upward. This is just a whole lot of speculation and guesswork at this point, and this maid, she seems to be behind all the gossip. Arthur Bill James, in his book The Man from the Train, alleges that a man known as Paul Mueller, a German migrant, may have been responsible for the murders. Paul was the only suspect in the 1898 murder of a Massachusetts family, and believes Paul killed dozens of victims based on research in the American newspaper archives. The Hinterkaifeck murders bear some similarities to Paul Mueller's suspected crimes in the United States, including the slaughter of an entire family in their isolated home, use of a blunt edge of a farm tool as a weapon, a pickaxe, moving and stacking bodies of the victims, and apparent absence of robbery as a motive. James, the author, suspects that Paul Mueller, described as a German immigrant in contemporary media, might have departed for the US for his homeland by 1912, after private investigators and journalists began to notice and publicise patterns in the family murders across state lines. Now, he seems more likely than quite a lot of them that I've talked about. He has a past. He bolted. You know, some of it seems to kind of fit. Many books and newspaper articles have been devoted to Hinterkaifeck. A series of articles revived interest in the murders. A documentary film, Hinterkaifeck, again it's German, can't pronounce it, from 1981, is based on a book that was written, not by James, I don't think. Again, German book. Hans adapted the book, directed the film, and was the cameraman. The film shown regularly. Yeah, it was shown regularly in Germany. 10 years later, Hinterkaifeck, again German, 1991, was produced, and at the same time Kurt Heiber produced another documentary shot on location and shown on television and in local cinemas. Also 1991, radio station, again in Germany, aired a documentary. And they ran a series of articles linked to that. In 2006, a German author, Andrea Maria, published the novel. It kind of looks like Tannoid, but it's German. A fictional account of the murders, although the setting and the names of those involved were changed. The novel sold over 1 million copies and was adapted into a film in 2009 and has been translated into 20 languages. In 2007, 15 students of a police academy examined the case using modern criminal investigation techniques. In their final report in German, they confirmed the meticulousness of the investigation at the time, but criticised the lack of professional forensics. In particular, the failure to take fingerprints was criticised, as this was already common practice at the time, although it is almost certain that the murderer or murderers can no longer be identified. All authors of the report independently agreed who the main suspect was in the case. However, his name was not mentioned out of consideration for his descendants. Well, that's just mean. I would like to know. You know, and I get it, you have to be respectful, but if this 2007 15 students of a police academy were onto something, surely they should let us know, just out of interest. In 2017, the last chapter of The Man from the Train by Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy, James briefly discusses the murders at Hinterkaifeck. The authors explain the possibility that the German crimes might have been committed by Paul Mueller, a serial killer. The authors believe killed several families in the US under similar circumstances between 1898 and 1912. We do have we can have a look at that. Maybe in another episode, but linked. Yeah, I can explain all that. That's fine. So they were linked to another case, which was known as the Axe Murderers. Axe Murders were apparently random nighttime home invasions in or near small railroad towns that left entire families bludgeoned to death with the blunt end of an axe, and were probably motivated by sadistic and necrophilia attraction to young girls. Oh my gosh. The pennies just dropped that poor girl, that poor 7-year-old Cecilia, was alive several hours after. And if they are my necrophilia, so that's after death, right? So, oh my gosh. The authors rate the chances of Paul Mueller as the Hinterkaifeck killer as more or less a toss-up, but conclude there's no real reason to believe that it's not him. And I quote, in 2018, the murders were subject of a season 2, episode 3 of the Amazon TV series Lore. Lore, not Law. I might have to look that up, just because. Oh my gosh. How awful is that? A whole family is... And it's never been solved at all. I'm just looking up oh my gosh, this is a whole other episode, which I can do next week, because yes, it's another long one. So I will do that next week. In Iowa, in the United States. So stay tuned for that. And if this Paul Mueller dude did do it, it's just sad that a whole family is wiped out. And like I say, it takes a special someone. I don't mean special in a good way. I mean sadistic or depraved to commit one murder, let alone a mum, a dad, a daughter, a young child, and then move into the house and kill the maid and a 2-year-old. I mean, but robbery wasn't the motive, because they still had all the money in the house. So what was the motive? Because it wasn't robbery. You could argue because of the implication of the incestuous relationship. I kind of want to say that it was abusive, but again, we don't know. I'm just projecting, I guess. But you could say, word got out and someone took it upon themselves to sort out Daddy Andreas. But why the young children? Why the wife? Or did the wife turn a blind eye? Or why Victoria? Do you know what I mean? This is all very complicated, and all of that. So yes, I did say, going back to the case. So the perpetrator also lived with the bodies for 3 days. During this time, they ate the food, fed the animals, started fires in the home's fireplace, and 4 of the bodies were found stacked up in the barn. Again, Paul Mueller liked to do that in his older cases, according to the author. I don't know that for sure, but and they were likely to have been lured there one by one prior to the incident. Other family members and their former maid had reported hearing strange noises coming from the attic. Yeah, again, that wasn't really looked into. So, as I said, less than a year after the murders and the murder investigation, the farm was completely demolished to remove the reminder of the violence that had taken place there. During the demolition, additional evidence was revealed, including the mattock covered in dried blood hidden in the attic, and a penknife lay in the hay in the barn. So again, knocking down this building, no one thought to go up in the attic. Like, what kind of... The police academy said they did a really good job in the investigation, and obviously I'm not privy to that, but come on, why don't you go in the loft and look around? You would have found the murder weapon covered in blood, and then you could have bagged it up and saved it until later on when it could be tested. The penknife also. After the demolition, a small concrete monument, which I cannot pronounce, but a monument was erected close to where the farm once stood, serving as a memorial to the victims, which, I don't know about you, but I appreciate that, because, CD or not, people lost their lives very tragically. So I like that they put a memorial there. I don't understand. I can understand you wanting to knock it down. They did it with Fred West's house, didn't they? And I was so glad, because they called that the House of Horrors. I have done Fred West on my playlist. Oh, that man. He's one of the worst. But they knocked his house down, and I think they put an alleyway in there now. Yeah, I understand that part of it, but a year later, and Fred West was in prison, or took himself out of planet Earth at that time. So I do understand that, but I just don't understand why less than a year, or a year on, less than a year, because it was 22, 23, so less than a year, and they demolished the building when there was so much more to be found if they just looked. My gosh. But there you go. That is Hinterkaifeck. I hope I didn't confuse you with so many names and so many repeated names. Cecilia, the mum and the daughter, and Joseph, the stepson of Lorenz, and obviously Victoria's 2-year-old son. There was a lot of repeat names. I hope I didn't confuse you with all of that. But there you go. How very, very tragic for that whole family. And let me know if you've heard of this before. And so many suspects. I kind of want to lean into that Paul Mueller dude. What are the chances that I think the dates kind of fit as well, because he left and then he came. Obviously, he was native to Germany, and then he left and he came to the States. Then he came back, I think in 1912 or 1914. Not sure completely, but he was back for 1922 when this happened. And the fact that James, the author, has linked him to this because of the similarities in the cases that he's obviously looked into. He hasn't pulled that out of anywhere, has he? But it does remain unsolved. And I want to know who the police academy have pinned this on. I'd be very curious to know if it is Paul Mueller, or someone else, or someone we talked about. But the fact that they have descendants, it could be Lorenz, because we know he has descendants. It could be any of them. They've all got descendants these days now, haven't they? So, yeah, very interesting. Very, very tragic, but very interesting. Let me know your thoughts on this case. I think it's very, very sad. Yeah. And a whole lot of iffy situations surrounding it, and I just thought it was interesting. So please do let me know what you think. Who do you like for it? Don't just go with my opinion. It could be any of them. Lorenz was very suspicious. He kind of knew things that maybe he shouldn't have known. And he went in and moved the maid, Maria, and the little 2-year-old. They didn't say where to. I mean, maybe he was the dad of Joseph and he picked him up and put him in his bassinet. We don't know that, but maybe. Not that I would do that, because I would want the police to, I mean, again, very different timeline, forensics and whatnot, but I would leave well alone and hope the police can find whoever did it. But he didn't. He was, why go in the house on your own? And the murderer could have been in there, because the murderers they were living in that house for 3 days. So, helping themselves to food, and oh my gosh, I can't even imagine it. Okay, I am out of here, guys. I need a fresh cup of tea. Thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. And I will be back next week. I will do the other case that we are linking to Paul Mueller. Let's see how similar they are. Very interesting. Might go on a Paul Mueller hunt. I'm kidding. Yeah, I just talk about true crime. I'm not an actual armchair detective. But yeah, let me know what you think. And thank you for joining me once again for another true crime. And I will see you on Sunday with another interesting case, I hope. Stay safe out there, guys. Yes. Okay. I'll see you next week. Bye.